could be. It's actually 9:46. So we're starting in Numbers 20. We left off at had a lot of rules last week, but now they've heard the rules again, so now they should know how to behave.
They should.
This is the 40th year now. We're in their last year of traveling. The next 16 chapters of this book cover 1 year.
Oh, they had a lot of work to do in that year.
Yeah. So the old generation is dying out, and a new generation is coming up. And this chapter is kind of a sad chapter. It starts with a death and ends with a death. So let's look at. Hi, Bob.
Was Moses the oldest?
No, he was the baby.
That's right, he was.
That may be why.
He was still around.
Well, the older Aaron and Miriam kind of rebelled a little because baby. How would you like your baby brother telling you everything to do? So let's look at verse 1. Wanda, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Wherever you're going to
And
sit.
the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there.
Okay. Did everyone get? Does everyone have a map? Because now the map will tell us some things about what's happening. So the wilderness of Zin is, well, you can see where Kadesh is. It's kind of where that green and the red line meet. So they have been wandering around for at least 38 years. It's been 40 years since they left Egypt, but they've been wandering around. So Kadesh we've seen Kadesh before. That's where they were when they sent spies up to the promised land to spy out the land. 38 years in a circle. Right back where they started. They have gone nowhere. Kadesh is also the place where Lot, Abraham's nephew, he had lived in that area, and he was captured and taken to Kadesh. That's where he was captured. This is when Hagar fled from Abraham. She got to Kadesh. So we've seen Kadesh before. So Miriam dies here. She was over 120 years old at this point. She may have liked dying, I don't know. Like, I'm done with this body. I can't even imagine. She is the first of the siblings to die, the first of the big three. It's an important point in their journey. Her death shows that there is no one exempt from this older generation. They are all going to die, even the big three. No special exceptions. God said only Joshua and Caleb would survive. Now, Miriam was kind of a complicated person. She was so courageous when she helped Moses in the Nile River, and she kept an eye on him and made sure he was safe. In Exodus 15, she led the Israelites in a song of praise after they crossed the Red Sea. But then she was disgraced in Numbers 12 when she and Aaron rebelled against Moses. That left a black stain on her life. It shows that no one's perfect. We all have our issues. Eusebius, who's a Greek historian that lived about 300 AD, said you could still see her tomb at Kadesh when he was around. So apparently they kept track of it. So we see that Miriam dies, one verse, that's it. She's gone, on goes life. Now, can you remember who is not allowed to come to her funeral?
Aaron.
Aaron. The high priest cannot attend a funeral. He can't go. He's not allowed to mourn. So we go on. Now verses 2 through 6.
Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, "If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this desert, that we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them.
Okay, most of the older generation has died by this point. So this is the next generation. When they left Egypt, the oldest of them would have been 20. Because God said the generation that they had done the census for, which was all the fighting age men and above. So 20 years old and up, they were going to die. So these are all younger than 20, probably most of them a lot younger than that. Or when they left Egypt.
So now they're about 60.
Now
In the 50s.
yeah. How much do they remember about Egypt?
Only what their moms and dads told them.
Yeah. And a lot of them were younger than that. Maybe have never even seen Egypt. Yeah, they have no idea what it's like to be in Egypt. So yeah, they're relying on mom and dad's memories, and mom and dad's memories are not good memories. Well, no, they are good memories about Egypt, which are wrong. So they're accusing Moses and Aaron of trying to murder them. After all these years. I mean, they've been doing this 40 years, surviving in this desert for 40 years, and this is not a pleasant desert to be in. And so they're showing they don't trust God, they don't trust Moses, they don't trust Aaron, and God isn't going to let them into the promised land until they do. So, what do Moses and Aaron do? Fell on their face. We haven't seen that for a little while, but there they go. And that brings God in his Shekinah glory. I think the people are going, oh.
Yeah.
It's been a while. We haven't seen. We get, this is like a movie where it starts one place and then jumps way in the future. We don't know what happened all that time in between. But nothing that God figured we had to know. Verse 7 and 8.
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the rod, you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals."
Now, water was a really important need in the desert, so lack of water would be a big concern. But they're going about it the wrong way, complaining about it. So God tells Moses, what does he tell Moses to do? Speak to the rock. Now, I asked the pastor the other day, why did God tell him to bring that rod? He specifically said, go speak to the rock. Don't forget your rod. Bring it with you. And it's like one of those things where, it's interesting to talk about, but there's not really a big answer. Faith, maybe everybody used to seeing Moses with that rod, so if he showed up without the rod, they'd wonder what was going on. Don't know. But why did God specifically tell him to bring it? So he was told to just talk to the rock. Back when we had an incident like this before, back then God told him, hit the rock. Not this time. Verse 9 through 11.
So Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. And he said to them, hear now, you rebels. Must we bring water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. And water came out abundantly in the congregation, and their animals drank.
Okay, so he starts off right. He takes the rod, he gathers all the people that God told him to do all that. Then he goes off script. First off, he lectures the people harshly and in anger. God didn't tell him to do that. Have you ever spoken in anger and said something really stupid? Me neither. Yeah. Yeah. This was not the normal Moses. Moses is usually the calm, almost like asking God to have mercy, and not this time. Maybe he's just gotten grumpy in his old age. I don't know.
He probably was fed up with just complaining all the time.
How many times have we seen him on his face pleading for the people? And we did see him on his face. Maybe he got up a little too early. Yeah. He was provoked. These were a stubborn people that did what they wanted to do, but he responded in sin. Later, they're going to describe this in Psalm 106. How this is. He responded in sin. Verse 10, it says, shall we bring water? Moses is talking. When it says we, he probably means, shall Aaron and I bring water? So he's talking like he's going to be providing the water. And yeah, him and Aaron. Nope. It's God that's going to bring the water. Alexander McLaren says, he who claims power to himself denies it to God. So when we take credit for things that God does, it's denying God's part in it. So then we get more disobedience. Now what did God say about the rock?
Speak
to it. And what did Moses do?
He hit it.
Not once, twice. Again, he is probably really angry. And it's like, oh, it's about time he got that angry. But that's not what God told him to do. Back in Exodus 17, when he was told to strike the rock, in the first incident, he struck it once then. This now is just anger. Now there's a Palestinian document that says that at the first strike, the rock dripped blood, indicating how tragic this was. Now, it's a Palestinian document that, one of those kind of things where they like to add things to it. We don't have any evidence, but despite Moses' sin and anger, does God turn around and say, nope, you don't get water? He gives it, and not just little drops. It's abundantly. Did they deserve the water? No. It's God's grace. Now, geographers and biblical interpreters say there are a lot of underground streams in that area, right under the surface. Even if that's what Moses found, it's still a miraculous thing, because it's not just a little stream that is gushing, and the timing. So if that's what Moses found, it was still a miracle of God. Moses is probably thinking, look, I did it. I brought the water. Now he's going to learn the truth. Verse 12 and 13.
And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy.
So not only had the people shown disbelief, but Moses had. And notice God throws Aaron in there too. So they didn't show faith when Moses struck the rock. When you don't show faith, when you show disbelief, you're denying the holiness of God. So there's a little bit of wordplay here in the Hebrew. The Hebrew word for holy is Qadesh, and they are at a place called Qadesh, Kadesh. So in Hebrew, there's some really great word plays that we don't get. So Moses didn't trust God. Remember, he spoke to them in anger and lectured them. He didn't trust God to correct his people. So he thought he had to do it for God. He thought he had the power to do it for God. So even after all these years, he still has a little bit of that Egyptian prince in him. But there's some other underlying factors. His sister had just died. And these people were so frustrating. But he still deserved a punishment. And this punishment may seem severe. This man that had led these millions of people through all this and been faithful, he's not going to get to lead them into Canaan. He doesn't get to finish the job. Seems like he just made one little error to us. So why so strict a punishment? God judges leaders by a stricter standard because so many people look to a leader. Moses represents the law, and that law can condemn us. One violation is enough to keep Moses out of the promised land. For us, one violation of God's law is enough to keep us from the promised land. But thankfully, we have Jesus Christ, who saves us from that punishment. So the Israelites have to be led into the promised land by someone else, because breaking God's law is a sin. Just breaking one is a sin. So they had a new leader that was going to lead them, Joshua, who another way to say his name is Jesus, was going to lead them into the promised land. We have a new leader, Jesus, who leads us into the promised land. So Moses, he was supposed to be a representative of God, but he's angry and moody, and that doesn't represent God. He didn't reflect the heart and character of God. So how does Moses react? Do you see any? But God, I was so good all those years. And he doesn't whine. He just goes on with his duties. That is a picture of faith in the face of adversity. And the people, they're still going to enter the promised land. God is still committed to give the land of Canaan to these people. So the place is named Meribah, which means strife, quarrel, or contention. It's the second time we've seen a place named Meribah. There probably could have been a Meribah everywhere along the path, but it's because they are such a contentious people, but God still shows his grace to them. Okay, so they're moving on. Let's look at verses 14 through 17.
And Moses sent messengers from Kadesh unto the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the travail that has befallen us, how our fathers went down into Egypt, and we have dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians vexed us and our fathers. And when we cried unto the Lord, he heard our voice and sent an angel, and has brought us forth out of Egypt. And behold, we are in Kadesh, a city in the uttermost of the border. Let us pass, I pray you, through your country, that we will not pass through the fields or through the vineyards, neither will we drink of the water of the wells. We will go by the king's highway. We will not turn to the right hand nor to the left until we have passed your borders.
Okay, so this is the start of a geographical section where we're going to see where they travel and how they try to get through. So at this point, they're in Kadesh. They want to go up around the Dead Sea on the right side. Now, if you look at the map, the best way to travel, the easiest way, the flattest way is along that coastline, along the Mediterranean Sea. But see all those red circles there? Those are forts. There's no way they want to go through forts. Especially since most of those forts are Egyptian forts. They can't do it. Now if you're traveling later, that's the way to go. So the next easiest way to travel is along the King's Highway. So the King's Highway runs, you see where the word Edom is and that mountain range? It runs just to the east side of that range. And that's the way they really want to go. But to go through that, they have to go through Edom. So you don't just take a few million people through someone else's country. Now you may wonder if they were in Kadesh Barnea and they wanted to get to Israel, which is right above them, why not go straight up? Straight up means going through dangerous mountains that were so easy to be ambushed in. So people did not travel up that way. So, especially with 2 million people and all the livestock and everything else, that's just not the way to go. So they want to go up the King's Highway. So they are so close to Canaan. And so if they can go up that King's Highway, they are so close to there. But the Edomites don't want to let them go. The Edomites are considered a brother nation. The Edomites are descended from Esau, Jacob's brother. And again, their most famous descendant is Herod the Great. Why don't they want them to go through? It doesn't say. Even though Moses says, well, we won't cause any damage, we'll replenish any water we take, we'll pay you, things like that. You know, he's trying to diffuse any of their excuses, and they just say no. Now, this came in the form of a diplomatic letter. That's similar to what other nations in that area would do at the time. You send a letter from the leader to the king and negotiate that way. Moses expects that the king of Edom knows the general history of them leaving Egypt. He doesn't go into a lot of detail. He says, no, we left Egypt and all this. So it must be common language or common knowledge. So he sends the request, and then verses 18 through 21.
But Edom answered him, You must not travel through our land, or we will come out and confront you with the sword. We will go on the main road. The Israelites replied to them, and if we or our herds drink your water, we will pay its price. There will be no problem. Only let us travel through on foot. Yet Edom insisted, You must not travel through. And they came out to confront them with a large force of heavily armed people. 21, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Edom refused to allow Israel to travel through their territory, and Israel turned away from them.
Okay, again, why? Why not let them come through? Maybe they're suspicious or afraid. That's 2 to 5 million people traveling through your country. Strangers passed through all the time on that King's Highway. That King's Highway was the major trade route. Moses is swearing they have no ulterior motives. They just want to pass through, but no. Edom shows up with an army ready to fight. But it's not time to fight. So Israel turns away. That means they are going to have to go the long way around. There's no record of God punishing Edom for this. In fact, in Deuteronomy 23, Israel was commanded to treat the Edomites like a brother nation. Now, eventually they're punished. I mean, how many Edomites do you know today? And from this point on, the Edomites are only mentioned as enemies. Amos 1:11 says, Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4 I will not turn away its punishment, because he pursued his brother with the sword and cast off all pity. His anger tore perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever. So God is saying he will punish them. God's showing Israel that they need to leave the judgment up to him. He's teaching them how to love those who hate you. We get that in a clearer picture with Jesus. So they are going to have to go up and around, and you can see from the green line that goes out, that's the path they're going to end up taking, where the King's Highway would have just hugged that mountain range. So a lot of extra mileage is put on them. And that desert that they're going through, Lawrence of Arabia, whatever his real name was, he said that is the most unforgiving, desolate, awful desert you could imagine. And Moses is having to take 5 million people through there. Verses 22 through 26.
And they journeyed from Kadesh, and the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came to Mount Hor. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron at Mount Hor on the border of the land of Edom, Let Aaron be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land that I have given to the people of Israel, because you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them up to Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments, and put them on Eleazar his son. And Aaron shall be gathered to his people, and shall die there.
Okay, so Mount Hor was either south or west of Edom. Apparently they're not sure. Traditionally somewhere near Petra, and you can see Petra on the map. So they went from Kadesh Barnea east, and it seems like they're somewhere near Petra. There's not a lot recorded about this, but there's a lot of travel, but not much progress. Our Christian walk can be somewhat the same way. We can do a lot of traveling and never get anywhere spiritually. And that's not what God wants for us. So, the second sibling, Aaron, he's told, you're going to die soon. He's given the gift of preparing for his death. When it says gathered to his people, that's the usual phrase to describe someone of importance and righteous who dies at a ripe old age. It was used of Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. They were all gathered to their people. Now, Aaron wasn't the one that struck the rock, and he's not the one who lectured the people, but he participated somehow. Because God tells him, because of this incident, you are not going to reach the promised land either. Verse 27 through 29. Betty.
So Moses did just as the Lord had commanded, and they went up to Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. After Moses had stripped Aaron of his garments and put them on his son Eleazar, Aaron died there on the mountaintop. Then Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. When all the congregation saw that Aaron had died, all the house of Israel wept for Aaron 30 days.
Okay, so Moses is back on track. He's back to doing what God says to do in the way God says to do it. He's faced some failures, but he's back to where he needs to be. So this is the transition of the high priest. Once Aaron dies, Eleazar becomes the high priest. The man died, but the office carried on. The nation was not to rely on Aaron as a person, but the office of the high priest. Aaron died a great man, but he had his flaws, and we've seen him. Yet God used him in a mighty way. We have our flaws, but God still uses us. So Eleazar becomes the next priest, and Aaron is buried on a mountain that overlooks the land of Canaan. So close. Then Israel mourns for 30 days. The normal mourning period is 7 days. When they mourn 30 days, is someone really important. Look back at verse 1. How long did they mourn Miriam?
Didn't say.
Yeah. We don't get a period of mourning. So, remember, the high priest can't mourn or be near a dead body. So at the point that the high priest's clothing was passed on to Eleazar, does that mean Eleazar had to go? We don't get that, because he couldn't be near a dead body. Not allowed at all. So the assumption is, yeah, he had to get off that mountain. Yeah, not be. Now, Moses is not a high priest, so he's allowed to stay. Okay, now into Numbers 21, more traveling. Verses 1 through 3.
king of Arad, a Canaanite who dwelt in the south, heard that Israel was coming on the road to Atharim. Then he fought against Israel and took some of them prisoners. So Israel made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will indeed deliver this people into my hand, then I will utterly destroy their cities." And the Lord listened to the voice of Israel and delivered up the Canaanites, and they utterly destroyed them and their cities. So the name of that place was called Hormah.
Okay, so this, you see where the Negeb is and Arad, and it's on the west side of the Dead Sea. So it seems like it may be in a little bit different order. And remember, Moses wasn't real good about writing in chronological order. So not sure if this is before Aaron dies or if they backtrack. But the Negeb is right there at the bottom of the Promised Land. So the Israelites are going to face their first hostile army, led by Arad, the Canaanite. So this is about 20 miles south of Hebron, an important city in Israel. It's a lot farther north than we would think they would be. It doesn't seem like they should be meeting up with them until we get into Joshua. So the most likely explanation is that he is the king of a nomadic nation, and that they're wandering. Their area includes the south area, and the Israelites are meeting them down near the wilderness of Zin somewhere, if it's in chronological order. So it says Israel lost some men to this king. Now the rabbis don't like that idea. So they say that it was only one slave, a non-Israelite slave, that was actually captured. But remember, they like to make up things. They didn't like the idea that a Canaanite king captured an Israelite. They didn't like it at all. So they changed the story. So the Israelites turned to the right direction. Finally, they turned to God. They didn't depend on their own skills. They vowed that if God let them win, they would completely destroy every city that belonged to Arad as a sacrifice. And when they say completely, they mean completely. Not take anything, burn everything up. Everything, everyone. Nothing would survive. They are removing anything that is not godly. And they do this as an oath. We're going to see this oath again when we get to Judges or Joshua. So once this oath is spoken, it is non-revocable. So keep that in mind when we hit Judges, that once they swear they are going to destroy something completely, they have to destroy it completely, or they're breaking their oath. So God gave them the power, and so they did destroy everything. This is the beginning of their wars of conquest. Now, most of these battles we're going to see in Joshua. These are not only battles for conquest, they are God's judgment against the Canaanites. These Canaanites, you may feel bad for them, but they were so sinful and depraved. God had given them hundreds of years to repent, and God is using the Israelites as judgment against them. One of the evil things they would do, this is just kind of their nature. When they built a house, they would kill their babies and bury them in the posts to protect the house.
To protect, right?
To protect their house. They would kill the baby and put it under the foundation of the house. That's the kind of evilness this nation had.
The Canaanites.
The Canaanites. And the Canaanites are actually, it's a collective name for all the tribes that were in the land of Canaan, but we have lots of different groups in Canaan. But they were all sinful like that and worshiping gods that demanded human sacrifice, and they were just not good at all. And because this was a war of judgment, that's one of the reasons the Israelites are to receive nothing, no profit from these battles. Nothing. Everything had to be destroyed. There was to be no joy in these battles. So we've seen Hormah before too, where they fought. That is where the 10 spies had returned and decided they needed, well, when the 10 spies returned and the Israelites said, we're not going to go up into the promised land, and then God sent judgment, and then they said, okay, we're going to go fight right now, and this is where they fought and lost really badly. Huge failure back in Numbers 14. God brought them back to the same place, and he gave them the victory this time. Was it the same people they fought against? We don't know. Numbers 14 just calls them Amalekites and Canaanites who lived in the hill country, so we don't know if they were the same people. But this time God gives them the victory because they turned to God. So this is a story of victory. Now we're going to get a story of defeat. That's the pattern. God shows us that even though we may have a victory, we haven't arrived. We have to keep an eye out and keep trusting him. So verse 4 and 5. Mm-hmm.
They traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom. But the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses and said, why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food.
Okay, so now on the map.
Here we go.
Yeah. So now when it says going down to the Red Sea, you can see it doesn't mean all the way back towards Egypt. It means going down and then coming. They generally called all this water area, like that's the Gulf of Araba or Aqaba. They call all that Red Sea. So going down toward the Red Sea means they went south. And the people are saying, wrong direction. We're supposed to be going north. But they're not. They're going south. And so instead of trusting God, they fall back on their normal thing. This is a really rough land. This is another one that Lawrence Arabia said it's not a pleasant area to be in at all.
All we'd have to do to feel like what it was is just walk out around here somewhere in the last day or two.
Yeah.
But can you imagine that for day after day and not being able to go into an air-conditioned place?
Yeah. The best thing you have is a tent.
And
you know those have to be miserable.
Yeah. But discouraging situations give us an opportunity to really trust God. Now, do they do that? No. They sound just like their parents. Not a good sign. Although they actually sound worse because they speak out against Moses and God. It's the first time we see them say, and God. Everything before has been speaking out against Moses, which is speaking out against God, but now they mention it. It's the seventh time they've spoken against Moses, but the first time against God. And when they say there's no food or water, in Hebrew, what it means, no food or water. They're saying there's nothing. Mom, there's nothing to eat.
But there had to be something, because they say there's no food or water. We loathe this worthless food.
Manna.
So
They hate manna. They're tired of manna. Did your kids ever go to the refrigerator and go, there's nothing to eat?
I do that.
open the cupboard. What am I going?
Yeah. I used to go to the cupboard and tell David, there's nothing to make a meal. And then he'd come in and make a gourmet meal out of it. How did you do that? Same idea. There's plenty to eat. There's manna. And they call the bread of heaven worthless. They're showing such ingratitude. God has kept them fed for 40 years. The word used for that word translated worthless here, only time it's ever used in the Bible. So there's disagreement on what the exact word is, but in context, they didn't like it. What ungrateful people. But then again, if we were there, would we like eating the same thing day in, day out?
I suppose.
Yeah. I get tired if I eat the same thing 2 meals in a row.
Yeah.
And they're eating it all their meals. Okay, so they've rebelled. Now comes the next step, the punishment. Verse 6 says, Then the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many people of Israel died. Every other time God is bringing judgment, he tells Moses, there's no warning. No chance for Moses to fall on his face this time. God's had it. When it says fiery serpents, there's several possibilities. It could be the serpents were red in color. It could be that their bite caused intense burning, or that they got a fever with the bite. All we know is they were fiery, not something you wanted, and they were poisonous.
Mine says venomous.
They were definitely venomous. They hated the manna given to them from God, from heaven, so God gave them serpents from the earth. By the way, Jews hated snakes. Hated. Probably even more than Indiana Jones ever did. In fact, one of the rules that gets enhanced is that you couldn't hunt on the Sabbath, which makes sense. That was kind of work, except snakes. You were allowed to hunt snakes on the Sabbath. They were concerned about snakes drinking any of their water in case they left any of the venom behind. So they would make sure to keep their water containers sealed as tight as possible. They weren't happy with the life God gave them, so God gave them death. Now they've tried to identify what kind of snakes they are. There's so many possibilities in that area. They have horned vipers, they have puff adders, they have cobras, they have black snakes, all poisonous. Wouldn't you like to live in that desert? We get rattlesnakes maybe. They get tons of them. They have something called a carpet viper from the Middle East. Could have been any one of these. Whatever they saw, they were. God was trying to get their attention. Think you got it?
Yeah, I think so.
So imagine the picture. Snakes everywhere. Where do you go to escape these things? They're in the middle of the desert. There's not like trees, and a lot of snakes can go up trees, I think. But so a lot of people died. Some people think this might have been the end of that older, unbelieving nation.
They couldn't run fast enough.
Yeah. So I think we'll do the next set of verses in that in the snake thing, and that'll probably be about good time. So verse 7 through 9.
And the people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he take away the serpents from us." So Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord said to Moses, "Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten when he sees it shall live." So Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a pole, and if the serpent bit anyone, he would look at the bronze serpent and live.
Okay, so this incident, this bronze pole, is really used as a picture of Jesus Christ come
John
too.
3.
Yeah. Notice Moses did not fall on his face. They came to Moses for once in repentance. Not just sorry because they got caught. They confess that they have sinned. First time we've seen them confess their sin. And they acknowledge that their sin is against God and Moses. So they come and ask Moses, "Please pray for us." It's the only place that they ask Moses to intercede. Moses just intercedes on his own every other time. This time they are asking him. The only other time we've seen anyone confess their sin in this book is when Aaron confessed his and Miriam's sin. The people have not confessed their sin till now. So God commands Moses to make a serpent, set it on a pole, so those who looked at it could be saved. And he did that. Now this is a really unusual miracle, unlike any other. There's nothing magical about the bronze serpent. There's no logical explanation for looking at something and being healed. So obviously it is a miracle. And if they refused to look at it, they died.
But you think about, this is in one spot, and this camp is miles and miles, so if they get bit, they've got a long ways to go.
Yeah, I'm not. It doesn't give us an explanation of, if they had a Jeep or something to run that thing through, or
Yeah.
Could be they looked in the direction.
could be.
And then
Maybe he went up on a elevated area, or they could look. Doesn't give us an
Doesn't
explanation.
tell us. Gosh.
So if they trusted God and looked, they were saved. Now they are absolutely forbidden to make images, to make idols. Back in Exodus 20. So the Hebrews are fanatical about not making any kind of images. But it was forbidden to make idols. This was not meant to be an idol. It was a symbol commanded by God. But sadly, they will make this thing an idol.
Yeah, they did.
They did. In 2 Kings 18:4, it says, King Hezekiah broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days, the children of Israel burned incense to it and called it Nehushtan. Nehushtan means a piece of brass. So they were idolizing this piece of brass. But they kept it. Now, King Hezekiah lived like 400 years after King David. So periods of time where they weren't worshiping God at all, but they were worshiping this piece of bronze. Man can take anything and
Make it an idol.
turn it around and make it an idol.
It's also cited in the New Testament.
Yeah.
In John 3:14,
Mm-hmm.
15. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life.
Yeah. So the pole resembled the cross.
My commentary says something similar. It says, some make the lifting up the serpent to be a figure of Christ triumphing over Satan, the old serpent, whose head he bruised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it isn't just looking at the cross. It is having the faith of what that cross is about that saves us. For them, it was just looking at this thing. Doesn't talk about faith at all. But for us, we have to have faith behind it. It seemed like some of the people probably died because they thought, this is stupid. Like today, people die in their sin because they think, this is stupid. But it isn't. Notice God didn't remove the snakes.
Oh, yeah.
The people would still get bites. They'd still feel the effects of the venom. But they would look to that standard. Today, God doesn't remove the sin of the world. We still feel his bite. But we have to look to that cross. Isaiah 45:22 says, look to me and be saved, all you ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. So that is where we are going to end this week, and we'll pick up in verse 10 next week.